Hi everybody, thank you very much for joining this video. So my name is Phil McKee, and what I want to do over the next 20 minutes is share with you some of my industry experience around career development and actually help you think through how to make your own effective career decisions. So hopefully this will be some practical guidance, and at the end we will kind of share with you a framework that you can be able to take away and use. So we make decisions every day. You've been making decisions, I'm sure. You made a decision to come and watch this video, and some of the decisions are quite tiny, and some can be life shaping. So if you're at a point where really we're going to focus in this video, which is really maybe you've just started to come to the end of college, you're deciding what do I do next? Do I go get a job? Do I go do an apprenticeship? Do I do a degree? Maybe you finished university and you're deciding, what do I do next? Do I go traveling? Do I go and get a job? Do I join a grad scheme? Um, Lots of decisions around your career that you may be thinking about right now, and sometimes it can feel quite overwhelming. So hopefully through this video you'll get a little bit of guidance and support to help you maybe kind of think through what is going to be the best career decision for you. So I think it's always good to talk about what influences your decision making process, because actually that can really help you think through the things that you want to include or exclude, and then applying that with a simple framework. Now, there's lots of frameworks out there. I've chosen one. Hopefully, it's a bit easy to understand. And ultimately, the goal from that is to help you make career decisions more confidently. So I think it's always good to start with some myth busting. So over the last 20 years, I think about different people I spoke to around career development. When I think about, some of the discussions, many discussions I've had with employees, whether that be team members, whether that be kind of supporting people, be it internal and external to work. Um, I hear a lot that, I must know what I want to do as a career right now, everyone else does. And the actual strange fact is, actually, more people don't know what they want to do, and some people will be working for many years and still won't know what career they want to do. So, look, if you aren't sure right now, that's okay. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. We'll go through a bit of structure and thinking that may help you down that pathway. But if you don't know right now, then in itself, that's part of your decision making process about what you do next. The decisions I make right now will shape the rest of my working life. Unfortunately, that is not the case. Again, it's a myth. I think the decisions you make right now will obviously set you down a path, but that path will ebb and flow, right? Life's about making, decisions and learning from those decisions, and sometimes those decisions will be right, some of those decisions will be wrong. That's part of learning. That's part of what makes life interesting. And if I think back to 20 years ago when I kind of had my first job, um, there is absolutely no way that the decisions I made right then would actually shape what I do right now. And this is where I would say my advice always is, based on my own personal experience, is my personal advice would be, really think the next 3 to 5 years. That's probably as long as you can go, because even then, lots of things are going to happen. Your life will happen. Work may change. What you see in work may change. And actually, your priorities may change. So the decisions you make right now are important. They'll set you down a certain path, but they're not the decisions that are going to kind of shape the rest of your life. So don't panic is the key bit. Other people find it easy to make the perfect decision. Why can't I? So this is a really interesting view, because sometimes I find, especially when I'm coaching, that actually this creates a lot of sense of perfectionism. People spending a lot of time to overanalyze to try and make the perfect decision. Perfect decision doesn't exist, unfortunately. Sorry about that. It really doesn't. Um, I always try to get people to think about it, and I would encourage you to do the same. It's about how do you make the best decision for you right now, and that means you may have to do that with incomplete information. You may have to, almost take a leap of faith, whether that's accept the job offer that you've seen, or sign up to that next kind of element of study that's important to you. Um, the important bit is there isn't a perfect decision. It's about what is the right decision for you. So I think when we think about making a decision, there is lots of things that we do day to day when we make decisions. Some of these decisions are automatic. We automatically get up in the morning. We kind of move out now, look at our phones. So for a lot of people, it's an automatic kind of reaction decision about, like, do I read a little bit more? Do I kind of like go get ready, or and usually sometimes I'm really bad for that. I'll spend the next 5-10 minutes and scroll through my phone. But if you think about all the decisions that you make, how often do you think about the steps that you take to make that decision? That's really important, because sometimes when we have big decisions to make, such as, relating to your career, you really need some sort of structure to help you think through that, because sometimes it can be quite overwhelming. Um, and that's really important when we think about the framework and that structure that it will give you. So if you think about what ultimately shapes the decisions that you make, we have this thing called perceived sense of risk. Um, so what is that? Really what this is that decision making, whatever it may be, does involve an element of risk. So it's a bit like, if you look at some of the kind of theory around, risk management and so on, actually you're trying to hedge a bet. So you think about your career, right? You're trying to decide what and how am I going to shape my career, but the reality is you really don't know how that's going to pan out. So that's why it's a risk. Now, the perceived risk to some of the decisions that you make will be very much based on your experiences. It may be, if you get a job offer where you have to move to a different part of the country or to a different country altogether, maybe you like being close to your friends and family. So that's a big decision that may not be able to make. And that's why high perceived risk, can trigger things like overthinking. This is where sometimes the danger is paralysis analysis, as they describe it. We can do too much thinking about it and get too much kind of into detail, and we never get to that decision making point. Equally, low perceived risk can encourage experimentation. So, maybe if you think about, you've made a decision to take a part-time job while you were doing your studies, and part of that was like, not too bothered about it because it's a bit of money, this gives me a bit of time to kind of connect people, a bit of money so I can do things that I want. It's not my career, so I don't have that much kind of skin in the game in it, but actually it was good to help me do the things I wanted to do at that time. There's a low perceived risk. And interestingly, risk perception ultimately is influenced by your past experiences, social expectations, and what that really is referring to, maybe social expectations of your family or your friends, or the people and groups that you kind of connect with, um, and also your tolerance of uncertainty. We're all very different in terms of, how much risk uncertainty that we're comfortable with. There's no right or wrong. It's really about you trying to find your way through to go how much uncertainty you're happy to deal with. And when we touch on some of these scenarios in a second, that will really kind of help bring that to life a little bit. So let's look at some examples. So, example one, you get a job offer from a company you like, but the role is slightly outside your comfort zone because it's not aligned to your degree or qualification. And this is quite common. Sometimes, people may, if your focus is to get a job, to start to earn money, if you've been in college, university, you're going to have incurred costs. You want to start earning money. That's the whole point why you've gone and kind of, got the kind of education that you've got. What do you do? And there's no simple answer here, because again, there will be many things. Maybe like, if you're, in a situation where you need to be earning money, actually this is a really good option, and actually that helps shape your decision. Maybe you are fortunate enough where you got a bit of financial backing where you can be a little bit more flexible in terms of, whether you wait for a different job offer or you look for something more aligned to your degree. And again, very much that will depend on what your qualification actually is. Scenario two, you get a job offer from a company you like, but the role's based in another country. So if you accept the offer, you're going to have to move job, but it is aligned to your degree and qualification. Now, again, sounds very easy and a very straightforward answer. Obviously, most people might go, accept the job, let's go to another country. But again, I think this very much depends on your situation. Maybe if you're a carer, you can't just up and leave. You need to be close to home. Maybe actually you don't feel comfortable traveling. Maybe you're quite risk adverse, and the current kind of economic climate around the world says that actually it's probably better, you feel better and safer staying at home. Or maybe actually the country in which the job offer just doesn't align to your values and views. All these things are things you need to be thinking about your decision about what you decide to do. And again, there is no right or wrong decision. It's about the best decision for you if that was your situation. Then we have another one, which is, you've received a job offer from a company that you've always wanted to work for, but the salary is minimum wage and it's not aligned to your qualifications. So, and apologies, you might be able to see it, sorry, with unfortunately my video at the bottom. So here's a company that you really love and value. You've really kind of always wanted to work for them. The job, unfortunately, just pays a minimum wage, so you get a salary, but it's not really that great. It's not aligned to anything you do your qualifications, but there's that kind of like intrinsic kind of motivation to want to work for the company. What do you do? Um, I have been in this situation, and unfortunately, I couldn't take that job offer, because I needed to earn money. I needed to make sure that I had a job that earned enough money to pay the bills, and that's really difficult. That's a really difficult choice. And being very transparent, almost 20 years on, it still resonates that I think about that. But they are just life choices that sometimes we have to make, and sometimes we may be fortunate enough where we can take that job offer and we've got the financial support. Other times we have to do sometimes things that are practical. And I think that's part of the challenge, especially if you think about, social mobility. Not everybody will have the fortunate position to be able to kind of like, take the kind of dream job offer. Sometimes you have to take the one that's going to actually give you the standard of living that you need to help you pay the bills. And these are all kind of just, I would say, the realities of life when you're coming to your career. There is no perfect decision that you make. And you'll hear me keep saying that because it is really important that when you're thinking through your decision about what's important for your career, you're really thinking about what's important to me, what are the decisions that I can make. So with that in mind, let's think about this framework. So it's a 5-step framework, and I'll shoot that in a sec. Two things. One, don't get hung up on the steps, right? If you've got a different framework that works for you, great. The framework is ultimately just a bit like I describe like a filtering system. It's to help you take all this load of information about what do I do around my career and help you get to the point where you can actually make a decision. So this one very easily clear. Again, it's somewhat ironic. I don't know how often it is clear to people. It's clear to me. Hopefully, it'll be clear to you by the time we go through it. So 5 steps. Step one, clarifying the decision. So seems a bit obvious, but what is the decision that you're actually trying to make? That's sometimes something we don't really give a lot of focus and thinking to. So maybe it is, do I accept the job offer? Is it, do I go on and do the next kind of study? Do I just get a job? What constraints or deadlines? When do I have to make that decision by? What is it? So if I'm maybe going on to do a PhD, and actually some of the decision making might be around, I need to actually get in, my kind of summary of what I'm going to do. I put in a proposal. I've kind of identified who my supervisors would be. Maybe it's you've got a deadline to submit a job application form, or maybe it's, if you're going to do further education, to submit an application form to start in September in a course. Whatever it may be, getting that clarity on what is the decision that you need to make. And that's where some of those perceived risks will come in, about help me think about that element of it. Options. So obviously there is never any one clear decision, otherwise we wouldn't be having this discussion. So what are the realistic choices? I talked about, my personal experience about, having to make a realistic choice that actually, a kind of job at a dream organization wasn't plausible. So actually that was a real, kind of realistic choice for me, that I couldn't take that one, which is fine. What information do I have around the decision? So I think about the job offers, do I understand the pay? Do I understand what they're expecting in terms of entry requirements? Do I meet those entry requirements? Do I understand, whether I would have to move as part of that job, or can I stay where I'm located? What information have they not give me? Again, sometimes we may make assumptions about information that's important to us. Is there any missing information? And how do you get that information? Sometimes that might be when you see if we think about job applications, they might have a recruiter that you can speak to if you want stuff clarified. There might be people, in your network, if you're connected to them, that might be able to give you some guidance on that. And sometimes you might be able to reach out to people to help, and it depends on the organization and the job itself. And then this bit, evaluating the risk and impacts, a bit like we are saying, it makes sound very, very serious about risk and impact, but really what this is really talking about is, what is the actual risk versus the perceived risk? And sometimes the perceived risk can be a lot higher than the actual risk. So what would be an example of an actual risk? Well, I apply for the grad scheme, or I don't. If I don't apply for the grad scheme, then I'm not going to be on that graduate scheme for that particular company. While not ideal, is that really a huge risk? in terms of actual risk to you. Well, what are you going to lose? Probably nothing other than maybe the opportunity, which is still important, but again, in the grand scheme of things, it may not be that much of an issue. Because there might be there's lots of graduate schemes there, maybe just one. Or if you're applying to maybe decide to go on an apprenticeship scheme, how what's the actual risk if you don't submit the application? And part of this is like just getting you to think about, and also almost give yourself a little bit of kind of leeway, not getting too stressed about things, because sometimes when we get stressed out trying to make these decisions, the kind of stress kind of creates this kind of response where then we get kind of just absolutely blindsided by all the things that are going on. So it's really important to try and stay as much as possible as calm and clear when we're going through these, and that's why understanding the actual risk versus the perceived risk is quite important. Now, the perceived risk can be very different because if there's family expectations, your own expectations, expectations from the college or university for you, that's going to be quite difficult in terms of trying to weed through how do you manage that. And ultimately, part of that could be starting to think about what's the best case scenario, what's the worst case scenario, what are my preferences if they're kind of misaligned to maybe what maybe my parents or family are looking for, how do I manage that? And also for you, what matters most, what is important for you? And I know that's very easy to say, especially when we're trying to please many of the people around us, but it is ultimately your career, and it is really important that you make a decision that is as the best decision for you, because ultimately you're the one that's going to have to get up in the morning, jump out of bed and go to work. And I can say I haven't had some jobs that maybe have not been aligned to my preferences versus those that have. I could definitely say that when you have something that really kind of hits that kind of gut and really motivates you, it is so much different and so much more pleasurable coming to work than it is when you're doing things that are just kind of completely misaligned. No matter how much you're offered in terms of pay, I can safely say that actually you have to really want to do the work that you're doing. Whatever that may be, it's about what's important to you. So I think once you've got all that and you've got all this information, so you kind of know what decision you've got to make, you know what options are available, you've kind of weighed up all the pros and cons. This is where actually you've got to really kind of, make a decision. You've got to actually make the decision about what you want to do. And this is probably the most difficult bit, because this is where you really got to take the leap of faith. You've got to really decide at this point, I've got all the information I possibly can collect, I've got all this information to help me kind of structure with the pros and cons, what's going to work for me, what I want, what I don't want. And then you've got to really ultimately make that decision. And part of this is really trying to identify, sometimes the overwhelming decision, say about, take the grad scheme as an example. Maybe step one is apply for the job. Right? Forget about whether you get an interview, whether you kind of, make it successful or whatever it may be. Step one is just apply. Apply for the job, and that's decision one done. Then if you get an interview, next decision is preparing for the interview. What do I need to do to prepare for the interview? You then get the interview and you get offered the job. The next decision is, do I accept the job? And that will come back to the terms and conditions. You accept the job, and then maybe you have to move closer to where the work is located. So then you make a decision about where am I going to live. And then you gotta make that decision. Then you go move to where you're going to live, and then you start your first day at work. And then it's like, okay, so I'm not at work. What I need to do now? Well, actually, I need to be clear on what my deliverables are. So I need to speak to my manager. Sometimes just breaking down the decision process helps you kind of just act with intention. So in that example, you may be at the point now where it is just apply for the job, or the grad scheme, or the apprenticeship. That will then start the pathway in which you go down. The last bit, now this is quite an interesting one. As a psychologist, this is one really important, reflect and refine. And what we're really talking about here is, how do you learn from the decision? So like I said, there is no perfect decision. There is no right or wrong decision. I think what it's really about, and which is what learning in life is all about, is you look at the decisions you've made, and sometimes you take a step back and go, well, if I was to do that again, what worked, what didn't work? I didn't like that course, or I didn't like that job, I didn't like that grad scheme. Why? What would I do differently? And I always say to everybody, the trick, or the guidance always is about, don't make the same mistake twice. Because if you make the same mistake twice, it suggests you haven't learned. And sometimes we don't take enough time to really reflect and refine our decision making process. And sometimes through that process, you will start to learn about, especially when we talk about the perceived risks, what are the things that are really shaping your decision making process. And obviously, as you go through life, those things will change too. You may be at a point now where you may be still living at home with family. Maybe in X number of years' time, you may be living with a partner. You may be, you may have other things going on in life. Maybe you have children, maybe you have animals. We have all these different things that can shape what decisions you eventually make and your perceived risk. So life will continue to shape this framework. But again, sometimes we can try and take, as the saying goes, boil the ocean. What we need to do now is keep it clear, hence the framework. Know what decision you need to make. Look at the options that you've got that are important to you. Go through the different influences that you've got in their perceived risk and actual risk. And most importantly, act with intention. And I would encourage you to always reflect and help with that. So hopefully that framework, like I say, there's lots of frameworks out there, will just help you think through what you need to do. Don't be afraid of making a decision. It is better to make a decision and try and learn from it than to make no decision, because if you make no decision, you will never move forward. And that will come with confidence, and it will come as you start to learn how you like to make decisions, how that will come through. And hopefully this is not just for career, and other things that you may be thinking about and other kind of life situations, this framework might become useful as well. So key takeaways, just to kind of summarize, there's no single way to make a decision, and there is no perfect decision, right? Do not get lost in the paralysis analysis of decision making. Perceived risk shape your decision, not just the actual risk. So make the right decision for you at this point in time. And like I say, it will change. You may look back in 5 years' time and go, that decision I would not make today. That's okay. What is the right decision for you right now? Use a simple framework like Clear. It will help you with the decision making process. I'm sure that you may have other frameworks, and that is okay. Just use something to help you get to that endpoint to enable you to kind of act with intention. And sometimes it is important that you keep it as simple as possible, because there can be an overwhelming amount of information out there that you may need to take into consideration. Okay, so look, I just want to say thank you for listening. I hope you find that useful. Hopefully there will be some insights in there that you may be able to take away. Always happy for feedback. Maybe you want me to kind of cover other points around the decision-making process, or share some more insights around career and career development or career decision-making. And please like and share the video if you find it useful. Please send it to other people if you think they may, at the point, that may be able to find it useful as well. And also, I'm interested if there's other topics. What other things could I help with? One of the things I really want to make sure that I continue to do is share my insights and experiences to help others as they start their career journey. And so yeah, welcome any thoughts about future topics. Thank you very much for listening, and see you again soon.